esteemed panelists, Marco Villalobos, who is a filmmaker, a writer, and a producer, and Hugo Arellanes Antonio, who is a photographer and an activist. We thank all of you for joining us in our program today online. My name is Laura Perez. I am the chair of the Latinx Research Center of the University of California at Berkeley, and we're happy to welcome you to session 2 of Afro Mexicanidad, a symposium. This afternoon session will run from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I want to next welcome my colleague, filmmaker and professor Ray Deyes, who will introduce this afternoon's panelists. I want to very warmly thank Professor Deyes, who was the key organizer, along with Professor Tiana Pachel of UC Berkeley, for today's event. I also want to thank Daniel Marquez, Abraham Ramirez, Frida Torres, Saray Montes, and Jose Aguilar, who worked to bring this event to you today. And I want to thank today's translators, Angela Zawatsky and Monique Incierte. Gracias. To activate the translating function, you could go to the right side of your screen at the bottom where it says interpretation, and then you can choose the language of translation. Please try to ignore the automatic Zoom translation, which is crazy and terrible, and just follow the audio translation. Finally, I want to thank the campus sponsors of today's program, without which we would not have the symposium today. So our thanks go to the Departments of African American and African Diasporic Studies, to Art History, to the Chicanx Latinx Studies Program, to Ethnic Studies, to Spanish and Portuguese, to the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and to the following research centers: the Arts Research Center, the Center for Latin American Studies, the Institute for the Study of Social Issues, and to the Townsend Center for the Humanities. Warm thanks to all of you. It is a great pleasure to welcome our honored guests today, and a great pleasure to welcome all of you who are with us online. Thank you, everyone. Gracias, and Ray.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. Gracias, Laura. Para empezar, quiero introducir a los dos panelistas.
To begin with, I would like to introduce both panelists, because this is the cultural segment, and it's mostly images and cinema and photography. So what we're going to do this afternoon, we are going to view the work of Marco Villalobos, who is a filmmaker and who is a script writer, and he is the director and co-producer of the half-hour documentary Beyond La Bamba. So I'm going to introduce him, and after the documentary, we're going to introduce Hugo Arellanes, and he is an activist and is a creator. He's going to talk to us about his job, and he's going to show us 3 galleries. And they are virtual galleries, and they're going to see them here on the video. Esta es una breve una presentación, y primero que todo,
Local. We're very fortunate to have him here, and we were going to see his film Beyond La Bamba. After the film, we will have a talk by Hugo Arellanes Antonio, Afro-Mexicano activist and photographer, who will talk about his work and about his images, about his photographs. And at the end of the program, he will take us in, and we will do a virtual tour of 3 of the galleries that he has put together in collaboration with Daniel Marquez. So this is going to be an afternoon of discussion and visuals. There will also be a Q&A period where the audience can talk and ask questions of Marco and of Hugo. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marco Villalobos, who will talk about his work in Veracruz over a period of, I believe, about over 10 years, 10, 15 years. So Marco, please take over.
Thank you, Ray. Y gracias a todos del centro y todos los otros artistas.
Everyone in the center, and thank you, Hugo.
Yo voy a hablar más en inglés porque así me puedo expresar
And I'm going,
bien, sin error, sin falta. So I'm Marco Villalobos. I'm of Mexican descent, you could say. I grew up in California as a sort of in the days of Chicano movement in the Reagan era, and really sent my sort of moral and ethical tone onto what would become sort of my production of art as an adult. And as Ray said, when it came to Mexico and to working in places along La Costa Chica and in Veracruz mostly, I began that work in about 2001. And just to give a brief history, you know, I started as a writer, and my interest at the time that I went to Mexico had come out of the previous few years, from about 1995 forward, when I started to study the poetry of Black Americans and New Rican Americans, and found that there was a discussion there that wasn't being had in my community as a Chicano from California, which was a discussion of African descendancy and in the regard for the African diaspora in Latin America. Coming from California, from Mexican family, you know, race in that sense was nothing we ever talked about. That there were people in my family with features, you know, that are commonplace, regarded as Black American features, phenotypically, and that the swath and the spectrum of visual sort of representation across my family's board was all over the place. So I had cousins with kinky hair, cousins, I myself had straight hair. You know, we had different complexions, we had different shapes of noses and lips and mouths, and this was never anything that was talked about. And I think it was touched upon earlier in the talk about mestizaje and sort of the number that does on Mexicans in particular, in terms of creating this sort of carte blanche for what we want that identity to be. And because of that, you know, I had no way of explaining why I looked different from my cousins when it came to the Black features that we might have had. And it wasn't until I removed myself from that context and went from California to New York, and again, having studied other writers who were writing about this and participated in discussions with other writers and artists around Blackness in the Americas, that I realized how lacking that discussion was in my own family and my own sort of local context. And so I took a conversation with photographer Ayana Valencia Jackson. We took that conversation about Blackness in the Americas to sort of figure out, you know, the question was like, if we can talk about Blackness in Haiti and Cuba and Venezuela and Colombia and Peru and even places like Argentina, then why are we not informed as much around my personal own history in Mexico and my family? And we went down there as our question was basically like, what can we learn about Blackness in Mexico? And so in that sense, early on, tried to sort of remove our biases in terms of what we knew about Blackness in the United States, and begin from zero learning about, you know, the experience of the diaspora in other places, specifically in Mexico. And we decided to go to La Costa Chica and sort of to begin there. And again, for me, the point of reference definitely wasn't Mexico. And it was a point of reference I was trying to elaborate. Like, my place in California, I knew wasn't somewhere that wasn't going to help me learn about Blackness in Mexico, about being Afro-Mexicano, Afro-descendiente there. So I tried to shift my point of reference and work against that bias and those biases as much as I could. And that point of reference shifted along with the geography of experiences that I was being exposed to in Mexico. And so we started in La Costa Chica, and from there decided that, you know, we had to come up with an approach to the work. And I can talk more about that approach later. I think basically starting in 2001 and being in Mexico often up until around 2005 or 6, we came out with a project called African by Legacy, Mexican by Birth. That was a traveling multimedia exhibition of photography, oral history, and film work, film, audio, sort of visual collage that traveled in the States and went internationally into different places in Latin America, always accompanied by workshops and spaces in which to facilitate the work of young Afro-descendentes in whatever community we were in. And we didn't realize at the time that this conversation around Afro-Mexico would become a sort of bridge between generations who had had this conversation previously, and a generation that was going to become more and more familiar with it as the 2000s turned into 2010s. And so there was a sort of goal we had to cross this divide, and also to provide, you know, an artistic thread to a conversation that for a lot of what we could find from then forward was really academic. And so we took that as far as we could in terms of Afro Mexico and sort of the voices we were trying to amplify, with the notion that if a population of people in any place was kept marginalized or actively invisibilized, then the door to injustice against that population, to abuse and to exploitation, neglect, and potential erasure could be carried out without accountability. So our objective, I think, early on was not just to create this diasporic network and carry the faces and the life experiences of Afro-Mexicanos that were teaching us about their experience outward to the diasporic community, but also to provide another venue for their voices and for their experiences. So it was really in the service of that. And eventually, once that exhibition had a life of its own, and once we sort of were able to sort of corral those concepts into an exhibition, I started to pursue a more narrow objective, which was to bring more Afro-descendente faces into screens. It originally was a television. I wanted to bring those to television, the big screen, whatever I could do to make sure that people were seeing these lives that had been sort of kept off screen and outside of the frame. And that led me into making this documentary, focusing, there were 3 elements I wanted to focus on. One was sort of home life, domestic life, another was work life, and the other was going to be cultural sort of artistic expression. I started with the cultural artistic expression, and that turned into Beyond La Bamba, which looks at Son Jarocho as a conduit for cultural freedom and for survival across borders. And so that's what we're going to look at now, is sort of that first that first branch of this study, what I was sort of in a way hoping to share about the experiences I was having in Mexico with the Afro-descendant community, and to sort of have a very intimate conversation through the art around what life was like in these communities that were embracing me and sharing with me, and how I felt like that could impact the wider audience of people around us. So Beyond La Bamba looks at the Utrera family, a Son Jarocho family in Veracruz, and an experience that they underwent over a number of years, from around 2008 to about 2014, when one of the sons of the Utrera family, who was an iconic musician, music family in Mexico, decided to cross over into the United States. So I guess maybe we can share the link and have a look at the documentary, and we'll circle back.
Okay. Very briefly, we are going to put up the link in just a moment, but I must just say that the work that Marco and Ayana did with Africans by Legacy, Mexican by Birth was very much influenced this panel, and actually motivated us into doing this work. So Marco, thank you very much for introducing us into this work. And then you met Tiana Pachel this morning, perhaps. She was also instrumental in motivating this panel and helping us form this panel. So thank you both very much. So I'd like to, at this point, go to the Beyond La Bamba, introduce the film. And so this is a little bit of an awkward handoff. So what we're going to do right now is, if you can see in chat, hopefully all of you can see in chat, the Vimeo link to Beyond La Bamba, which runs approximately about 56 minutes. But what we're going to do
26.
I'm sorry, 26. Sorry, it's a little less than a half hour. So if you go to that link, watch the film, and then we'll come back at 2:48 and continue this discussion. Okay, thank you. See you in a few. Okay, we're back. I hope that all of you enjoyed the film. I wanted to just point out that on this film, Marco, your wife collaborated on this. Daffodil Altan was actually co-producer, co-director on this film. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Daffodil was, she was a major part of the team. I mean, the title things at the end, we all kind of shared the work. So, those are kind of a formality, but she was definitely a large part of understanding, she's Guatemalan American. So even outside of the context or the reference point of Mexico as a place in her own sort of family geography in some way, was able to sort of to help navigate some of the questions of like what needed to be explained or what stood out to her that I might have been overlooking. But yeah, definitely. And Daffodil now is a reporter producer with Frontline PBS, an Emmy award-winning Latina producer there and correspondent. Yeah.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you very much. And I want to just remind everyone that if you go to the bottom of your screen where it says interpretation, we have translators, Angela and Dasha, who are both translating from Spanish into English and English into Spanish. Así que si necesitan traducción, por favor, vayan al botón en la página y donde dice interpretation ahí. Pueden escoger.
Please go to the page to choose interpretation into Spanish or into English. Please choose it at the bottom of your screen. For now, we're going to leave Marco, and we're going to go now to a presentation by Hugo Arellanes Antonio, who founded Huella Negra. He is a photographer and an activist. And in this session, he's going to present us to 3 galleries that have his work, and he's going to explain to us here his work. He's going to talk to us about his work as activist and artist. He's an Afro-Mexican, Afro descendant. So Hugo, we're not seeing you there. Now we see you. You can start. Hugo, welcome, and thank you so much for participating with us. Your work is very lovely, and we're going to see it for the first time here in North America, in the United States. Yes. Thank you very much, Raymond, for your invitation to the symposium. And welcome, and congratulations, Marco. I love your documentary. It's lovely, and I think that after my talk, we'll have a chance to ask questions and just to see what happens. I'm going to start sharing a presentation with you where I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the work that I do as a photographer since some time now. And so let's begin. Can you see? This talk or this presentation that I did is called Afro Mexicanness, intimate photography of the Black people, peoples. So I began my career as a photographer quite some years ago, more than 10. And somehow during this time, one of the premises I've worked on is how do I want to see myself? How do I want to be represented on an image basis? So my work has been to research a lot and collaborate within the academic world. I have been able to share space with Monica Moreno. She had her participation in the morning. I've been able to talk with a lot of people, and that's been very enriching for me. So I start with this. I'm calling it intimate photography of Black peoples. I'd like to begin by saying that I started with an analog camera, this one that we see here on the screen. I've started photographing daily life, photos of a register of the things that I was seeing in my daily life, with the intention of first being able to show it in other spaces, because very little is known about Afro Mexicans. And this was a way for me to establish a sort of archive. And I never imagined at that time that I would be able to dedicate myself to it in a professional way and to be able to live from it, from photography. I don't think that at that time I was imagining it. I didn't think about it. So it's been lovely, wonderful that with the passing of the years, I can live from this and I can continue doing photography and exploring representations of what it means to be Black, Afro descendant, Afro Mexican in the area where I live. So I can share this image with you. It's in the community called El Ciruelo. This is where I began as a photographer. Some workshops in this community where Paulina Garcia, Roberto Olivares, here in the back we see one of the directors, film directors, who supported us a lot in eradicating stereotypes about people in Costa Rica with images. So anyway, those people were my assessors, and they arrived in the community and they permeated my life to such a degree that I became a photographer as I am now. Since the beginning, I have been involved in activism ever since the encounters of Black peoples began to be organized. This is a meeting that happened in the town of El Ciruelo around 2006. And in these encounters or meetings. We were looking for a way of being heard. An intense struggle was being initiated in finding to, to find constitutional rights, and we are recognized now in the in the federal constitution, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, since the recognition that we have currently is still lacking many items. And it shouldn't be just a nominal recognition. So in this day to day that I was seeing, I was trying to imagine what it would be like to live in other spaces. So I would take photos of anything that crossed my path as a way also of remembering afterwards. There's a very lovely text, very beautiful, by Pedro Meyer, a photographer who's very recognized in Mexico, who would say that he would take photographs to remember. And I think that when I read that text, it was really worked on me, because I thought that the life in communities was going to be changing very quickly as life changes in the cities. And to my surprise, in communities, the process is much slower, and we can see this in education, health, government, access to internet. I think it's actually been very too slow, and communities. The difference between the chasm between access to information, it gets greater and greater. And one of the galleries where this work is being exhibited, such a large space, like in the symposium and on the internet, because it's going to happen along these networks, is very great. It's very cool. So during all of these years, I've had the chance to enter into the intimacy of many people. For example, this is a portrait of one of the musicians in Costa Chica, important in Costa Chica, Choco el Bandeño, a musician who has stood out because of his professionalism, because of the way he interprets our music in Costa Chica. So it's been the day-to-day sort of being with the families and taking photos when they're resting. I've also had the chance to take pictures of our dances, which I think are an important part of how we are represented. But also relative to dances and holidays or festivals. One of the things I've tried to do and that I've taken great care of is not to fall into a folklorization of our culture, because I feel and I think that folklorization of our communities is not the path towards reivindicating the dignity of the Afro people in Mexico. So I have tried to be very careful. This is another one of the very representative dances of Costa Chica. It's the dance of the devils, Danza de los Diablos. And it also has a very particular story that has to do with slavery, processes within slavery in that area, and also with the resilience that we have as a Black people, Afro descendant. Little more than a year ago, I also worked with a photographer from Veracruz, Coral Carballo, to whom I send many greetings. We're focusing quite a bit on rescuing and preservation of the family album. I think that the family album, just like orality, are fundamental to know our story, our history as a Afro-descendant population. So we've been taking workshops to communities in Chacagua, Tututepec, Charco Redondo, Chacagua La Grúa, where we've taught people how to clean their photographs, how to take them out of the album, photo album, because the photo album at some point was thought of as a kind of a mechanism to protect these photos. But it's been shown that instead of protecting them, it actually makes the materials sweat, and with time they start to get erased and get stained, and so they don't last as long, that they don't last the life cycle that they should have, which is 50, 40 years. Sometimes the photos that we have only last 10, and then they start to get erased because of the passage of time, and especially if their families close to lagoons or to the sea, because the salt in the air tends to deteriorate everything, from constructions to buildings to vehicles. Everything deteriorates. So that's been a fundamental part of what we've been doing in our workshop in album preservation. So I've taken pictures of my neighbors with their children, their grandchildren. I always try to make these images powerful, dignified, and returning always to the original premise, which is what's always motivated me, which is, how do I want to see myself? How do I want to be represented? That's always been my premise. One of the galleries that we're going to see, and that I'd like to talk to you about, kind of larger scale, so that when we see it, you'll be able to see more detail there. You'll find deeper text, go into more depth. But one of the galleries is called Huella Negra, meaning black print. It started in 2014. Many young people, we've got together with the same preoccupation, which is, first, as young people, we didn't have spaces to be able to talk about issues that would come up for our age group, and sometimes for those who were more adults, they become kind of secondary issues. So in this project, we dedicate ourselves to foment, promoting, and visualizing Afro culture, but we also try to eliminate the stigma and the racial profiling of Afro-Mexican persons. This project is strengthened, was strengthened when I moved to Mexico City. One of the first things that I bumped into in Mexico City was a mobility study that had started in 2017, that said that your aspirations in terms of work and life were decided by the color of your skin. So if you were a person who had the white tone, then your possibilities, success in life, let's say in companies or in the academy or whatever kind of business, would be very high. But if you had a darker skin tone, your greatest would be the most you could aspire to would be being a worker. And to me, that was very difficult bit of information. I mean, it was something that, I don't know, it was something that could also be rephrased. So in this project, what we did was have give ourselves a challenge to look for people who were Afro descendant, who recognized themselves as Afro, who lived in the Mexico City, and who were doing something, contributing in an important way to the population. And so this is Luis Liborio. Luis Liborio is a musician. I'm looking for his profile here to very quickly read it to you. It's very fast. Luis Liborio is Afro-Mexican. He's an immigrant from Toyotlatec, just as he says in his, in Marco said in his documentary. There are a lot of people who are Afro descendants tend to migrate because there aren't opportunities in their area. And so they look for other opportunities outside. And in this case, Luis moved to Mexico City to be able to go to Limba school and to be able to graduate as a composer and then go to the UNAM and graduate in international studies. So Luis contributes in his creation of sounds, and he's part of the plurality in Mexico. Another case in this project, we had the Nayeli and Nancy Zaguilan, two sisters, Afro-Mexican, who are students and work in the Secretary of Public Education. Nancy in the back is the attorney, and Nayeli in the front is a teacher, and they contribute to a more secure city. They're interested in rescuing their Afro-Mexican roots and valuing of their traditions. When the interpreter said education, she meant security. She should have said security. In the same project, which we asked ourselves, who were our grandparents and where were they? And part of this project, it was lovely to have this oral history that our grandparents have. Expose ourselves to these oral histories, and unfortunately, sometimes we don't take it into account because our young people is also, we're going through a phase where we're more focused on information that we have on the internet and things that we have in our hands, and so this connection that which is intergenerational has been getting lost, where we sit and listen to our grandparents. So these are photographs that I'm going to show you really fast of our grandparents. This is Mama Choma, the state of Veracruz. We can see how important it is for her, how important image is for her. When I decided to take this photograph, I wanted her to be in this, at the center of this image, because I don't know if you can see, but the biggest painting here, up above here, there's like chains, there's a dove, and then underneath on the bottom part it says el último, the last one, because in this area in Mata Clara, Veracruz, there was a very intense process. There's slavery, and 5 to 10 minutes from Mata Clara is Yanga towns, which was one of the first freed towns in America. So these photos give us a sense of this process, this the slavery that we lived in the national territory, but that very often we don't see, or we think that this process is part of the past. Then we have Miss Rosa, which is from San Marcos Guerrero. And she was also telling us about her story as a migrant. Uh, from San Marcos to the city of Mexico, she worked as an archivist in the international airport. And as part of this project, she was able to educate her family and inform her family. And now she has a very dignified life after a great effort. And this is Edna's mother, colleague who's part of Huella Negra, and she is someone who was born. She was born in Zacatecas, and she also didn't know a lot of her story because all her life they had made her think that she was indigenous. Because since she wasn't white, it was all it had to be indigenous. Also, because there was like a lack of knowledge of Afro descendant families in heritage in the Mexican territory. So these are three examples really fast there in the galleries, and you can go see the project Huella Negra. These are the three projects that I want to talk to you about today. So then there's El Polvito en tus zapatos, the dust in your shoes, which is a second gallery. And you'll see it in a moment. And this was something that was commissioned by African Americans. It's a transmedia project, which was included all of Latin America, where there are more than 40 artists participating from different disciplines. And what I did in this project was to take photos of objects in Costa Chica, which mean a lot to us as descendants, African descendants. But one of the things that I was suggesting was that we can approach different cultures if we look at the objects. So these photos are part of this series called Polvito en tus zapatos, where I was also looking collectively to identify what are those objects that identify us. I did a survey in social media so that people could help me identify them, and so that it wasn't just me who was deciding what represented us, but that this was a massive this is input that people could say, well, this means a lot to me, and I feel that this is a representative object in the Costa Chica, for example, the machete or the mask of devils, or this chaple, this object that we have here. These objects had a great significance for people because of the use they had in daily life, ritual life, in dances within our communities. So for me, it was one of the projects that I have that has most helped me understand how we live this relationship with objects, nature, in our territory, and even what our relationship is with our own bodies. Another one of the objects that we have is this recorder. And also, probably Marco touched upon this, and that is uh, in Veracruz, in communities where there's Afro communities, it's very common that music for us is a very important part. Music is a way of having oral culture with the artists we have. They write the lyrics and they tell us how life has been in corridos, boleros, or popular songs, chilenas of our country. This is how we diffuse our plurality, and this is important here because it's how orality can be reproduced with this object. Just for a minute to go back, a question that I have asked myself as part of this project, Polvito en tus zapatos, commissioned by the project Africoamericanos, is what does this mean for us? And we can apply this in any territory where we are. What does this signify? What do they signify for us? Because I was just seeing the documentary and I was thinking, well, how isn't it important? Or how important is it for this young man to play in the United States? How important is his jarana? How important is all of his wisdom that he's gained because he grew up in a family where they worked these instruments and where they've been a fundamental part of the construction of Son Jarocho in not just Veracruz, but nationally, because that family is very important in this tradition, which is the Son Jarocho. So what do these objects mean to us? How, I mean, we can see objects in our places and then and ask, what do they mean for us? Another one of the themes that I've really gone into in the last years is a body as a territory, as a vehicle for resilience. And so I've been working with self portraits where I try to find my own, Afro Mexicanness identity, based, beginning with my relationship with objects and my relationship with whiteness, which has been a fraught. It's been a fraught relationship. These are self portraits. This one in particular is one that I prepared for the text of Ms. Moreno, where she asks, what is the role of repugnance in racism? You can find that in Google or in Facebook, like that. What's repugnance a word for in anti-Black racism by Dr. Moreno, and it's a very interesting text. And then continuing with this, my body, how do I use it? How I to reivindicate my Afro descendants. I've also noticed very much how skin color functions, how sometimes it opens spaces for me that where I can participate, but also not how it helps. No, not how it helps. Rather, how from my skin color, which is dark, many times my body has been read negatively by people who work in public security enforcement. I have been an object of racial profiling, and I've been stopped many times to for searches of alleged, well, they call it routine searches, but that's how they express it. Police agents express themselves, but police officials. But I realize that this routine register search is usually for people with darker skin, because when they see a white skinned person, they don't say we're going to do a routine search of your belongings. So that's been one of the things that I've tried to get evidence of how bodies are object of racial profiling by police in Mexico. Security, public security police, and immigration police, and now it's going to be happening more cases of this kind because Haitians have been entering the Mexican territory, and the police, immigration police, has been very violent when supposedly respecting their rights. And so along those lines, and also supporting from Mexico the actions that took place after George Floyd's murder, to use the body as a sort of board to say Black Lives Matter, and to add myself to this protest. That's been part of my activism. I've been wanting to support to fight racism, not just in Mexico, but in other places. I don't know if I still have, if I've used up my 30 minutes, or because quickly what I'd like to talk about my last project, which is Despedimento, farewell of some kind. And this has to do with Afro descendants populations and climate change. This Despedimento, farewell, is something that I began about 3 years ago. And it began with a preoccupation which has invaded me since I was very young. But I'd like to know, Daniel or Raymond, if I have time.
Sí, por favor, siga.
Yes, please continue. So in this project that we can see here, it's a project that tries to sort of make people sensitive to certain things, and I'll give you some context as to what's happening.
We're going to see what is happening. I'm going to give you the context. This is a brief context. I tell you what is happening in Latin America. And we know that climate change is something that concerns everyone, and it's a global problem. But the problem is, and the biggest problem for Latin America is that a lot, they are, that the people are Afro descendants, African descendants, and about that a lot of these people are African descent or indigenous, and especially in Mexico and Laconario in 2016. There was a report for the federal government, and it stated that in 2030, by 2030, on the Pacific coast as well, and as well as the Atlantic coast, there's going to be floodings are going to be huge because there is not what concerns me the most is this not being this is not being taken care of. I'm from Costa Chica. They don't even have they don't have information. They have no idea what climate change is and how it is going to affect us. And what I wanted was, I wanted to think about and I wanted to tell the society the way that we're living it. And this is why I wrote this poem. The birth of this poem accounts for the process of the slavery that occurred in Costa Chica, and the name was and what we do is this is a prayer, the prayer which we when we take the cross in order to take our dead, beloved dead, when we take them to the cemetery. And this is it. Goodbye, my dear house, my dear fields. This is my goodbye to you all. This poem, I wrote this poem as a way to I wanted to remind myself of the way things are occurring. I'm going to read it to you right now. Well, before I read it to you, I'm going to give you a small I'm going to tell you it's an anecdote. And I wanted when I was little, because this is something that concerned me when I was a child, is that I'm afraid of the end of the world. Because we have been told that the end of the world is going to happen since the religious point of view, that everything was going to end the year 2000. Then after, from the fiction, of course, films talk about alien invasions or natural events too. And I remember I used to be very afraid of the end of the world when I thought about this. And I remember my dad approaching me and saying, "Don't worry, the end of the world happens every day. The thing is that some people have a date and other people don't have one." And so he told me that in when those places where there is a tsunami or an earthquake, a horrible earthquake, that is the end of the world. They've had the end of the world, where just famine or drought, that has been their end of the world. So my father would end his presentation, or what he said was saying, we didn't have a date in Costa Chica. We didn't have a date yet. So I could just be happy for a long time. And this is something that went on for a long, long time. And when I started thinking about climate change, I realized that as African descendant, we already have a date of the end of the world. And CONAVIO in Mexico, the World Meteorological Organizations, in this year, and also we already know what coastal situations are going to undergo with climate change. So this fear has reappeared in my soul because of this imminent situation, which we would call climate change. So I'm no longer frozen as I was when I was a child. So I decided to do something. I decided to make pictures. It's called the third room, which is called the experiment. And I have a series of pictures which evokes the peace, the ignorance, lack of misinformation or disinformation that we have. But we are waiting for the end of the world very peacefully instead of not knowing, understanding that it's already happening and very close to us. And then I'm going to read it to you, and then I will send you a few images, 2 or 3 of this. This is the text. My gaze imagines it, and I imagine, I discover that I dream. We see the dawns and the twilights of the past. And if our images could bring us to what is possible, fishermen would bring their fish nets filled of futures. The breeze would bring us the happy and serene future. But right now, we have the strong smell of the future. I see the bright eyes of the water that will reach us, or when the earth is no longer to be able to give us or want to give us more soil. So there are trees that come and fall, and they tell us what is going to happen to the skies. We're going to navigate the skies in order to find greener pastures, because from the height we'll see houses that are overflowing with pictures that we don't know what, so we can see the present. We never say goodbye because we're always in now. I don't want to lose the now. I don't want to be quiet and not doing. I don't want to be just a now. That is the poem that I wrote for this exhibit. And this is I'm trying to simulation to imagine what Mexico is going to be like in the next 50 years, when the level of the sea is going to reach Veracruz, Baja California, Sinaloa, especially Guerrero, Oaxaca, and Chiapas, which are places filled with people with a lot of African descendants, and these people and the places that have been abandoned, disregarded by the Mexican state, and they're not bringing about measures in order to inform and communicate with these territories. So these are some of the pictures, some of the photographs that I have made in the last 2 years, and that I try to show this dearth of action, this passivity with which we're expecting the end of the world, and how we say goodbye to our land.
Bueno, esa es la
So this is my address at Instagram. So if you want to see, I will upload a lot of content. Maybe I can invite the general audience in order to, I don't know if Daniel is going to help us with our tour.
lo que quisiéramos hacer ahora por el momento es tener una plática.
Ah, sí,
Maybe
sí, sí.
what we need to do is have a discussion,
Y con Marco
and with Marco,
para que el público pueda ver
so that the audience can discuss with you all these topics. Thank you so much. Beautiful. This was very moving, and so were the images. Thank you for explaining this. Could you please, could you upload your question to chat, and then I'll be the facilitator. But the first question is mine for Marcos and for Hugo. Why are you using images? Why do you work with images?
Y de otros grupos indígenas.
And others, are you representing other groups? How come these images? Why is images so important? Why are they?
Would like to talk a little bit about the fact that both Hugo and Marco work with images. And if you could talk a bit about the importance of the image for Afro descendants as well as indigenous people, both in Mexico and the United States, as well as other third world folks in the United States, other minority groups. So we can focus it on the images, the importance of image. Please, el que quiera empezar.
Whoever wants to start, go ahead. Hugo.
La importancia de la imagen en tu trabajo, en tu pensamiento y
¿Comienzo yo?
The importance of image. Shall I start?
Okay. Bueno, creo que para mí la imagen ha sido muy importante porque a partir de ella
images have been very important for me because we have created images as well stereotypes. So in Mexico in particular, this has been very visible because this is structural racism, and the representation of this racism it starts from imagery. So
campañas publicitarias en México.
We can see some commercials and products. They never show whenever we show any kind of commercial show in Mexico, they don't show any Black people or indigenous people, but whenever they show anything that's bad for health, for your health, or for social relations, they always have, they use Black bodies. The tendency is to use, especially for instance, in telenovelas, soap operas, Black people, Black individuals do not play an important role. They're not the protagonist, but they'll be a driver, the domestic worker, the cook, the bad person, the killer. So in this case, I wanted to revindicate, in other words, I wanted to claim, I wanted to show that African descendant, we are very different, and we're not like we're being represented like in this project, Huella Negra. I wanted to find 12 people who were doing important contributions so we meet with lawyers, psychologists, historians, a, a panoply of stuff, of some of the things that Black people can do, because normally they show us as funny and good dancers and not able to do, accomplish, and create important and beautiful things. We're plagued with stereotypes, and we need to eradicate them. So, from an imagery, so we want to fight this negative image, and this is what I do. I place a positive image of Afro descendants, the African people, and I want to show youth and young people can have real aspirations. So that way I have positive references, positive reference. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Hugo. I think in my case, the reason to choose imagery was, we have to remember that the project started,
In mi caso,
Mexicano project started in 2001. So at that time, there weren't many images. There was like one exhibition I was familiar with by Tony Gleaton that maybe toured at least in California in the early 1990s, around 1989, 1991. And that was the only instance that I had as a reference point for Afro Mexico in imagery. And that's just to say that before that point, I wasn't educated enough to identify the rasgos africanos that I was seeing in Mexicanos prior to 89. Like now I could go back and think about the ways that the project for Mestizaje had changed the look of what a Mexican might have looked like stereotypically. But after 91 or 90, when Tony Gleaton's exhibition had toured, there was this idea for me that people, so 10 years later when I was doing the African by Legacy work, there was an idea that people needed to be confronted with a population they weren't willing to be confronted with, in a way, so that the image was integral. I know for the photographer to place, and we had discussions about placing the faces in front of the camera with a direct gaze into the camera, so that there was no negating the existence anymore of a Black Mexican, of an Afro descendant in Mexico, so that the image was crucial in terms of, it's like creating a proof for someone, especially our audience at that point was in North America, but and the rest of Latin America, but to say that like Afro Mexicans exist, and here is one looking at you now, in a way. And it was a way of, also the style of the presentation in the gallery was, as Hugo referred to earlier, it was a family portrait style, so that when we would install these exhibitions, we would use that approach of arranging photos on a wall as though you would find them in a living room. So it created this sort of wider network of diasporic family in front of you visually, and the way that, one, you could relate to because it looked like any auntie, any grandmother's sort of family portrait wall, and two, there was no way getting around the fact that you had to accept the existence, you had to recognize and begin to contemplate and to dialogue with these photos that were lives of people who had otherwise been pushed to the margins, we were trying to bring back into the center. So really the image was a way of confronting people with the portraiture. And so a lot of times in the book, in the gallery catalog, you would see, if you weren't able to make it to the exhibition, you would see straight on, face to face, eye to eye with the Afro descendants who had allowed us to take their pictures and who would share their experiences with us. And I think that was at that time the most effective way. And later it became through film for that project, where next it was like moving image. And the idea behind the moving images was that they would look like your own family home videos. And we shot them on Super 8, which is, of course, I used a silent film, and we shot them on Super 8 so that they would look older. They looked oftentimes like people thought, like, where did you find this footage? When was this from? It looked older than what it was. So it was sort of this anachronistic way of presenting something in the present time to reflect a history, although the footage that we had used in the galleries was taken, 1 or 2 years prior to the actual exhibition, so that we were ingrained, we were implementing this feel of something antiquated and old, but also juxtaposing that contradictorily with the fact that these people were also in the portraits, that this was a living history, and these were people that hadn't gone anywhere. This is people that were there in the immediate sense. And I think that immediacy was also reflected in the portraiture. And to Hugo's idea, it was also about putting people on the screen, and it continues to be an objective of mine this day, putting people on the screen that haven't been afforded that position, and it was sort of been excluded from the experience of having a leading role, the experience of being something other than the maid or the domestic work, the right that everyone has to be represented on screen, but not just for representation's sake, but for the sake of the audience's reality. Because for me, it's not enough just to represent myself or a Chicano or a Latinx or an Afro Mexicano or Afro Descendiente. It's the representation isn't enough for me. It's the ability to take one's experience and flex that into a larger community in a way that impacts it, and changes it and shapes it, and in a way that demands recognition for that. Because if we look at the history of the Americas, the fact that we haven't had imagery of Afro-Mexicanos, for example, has made it easier to, again, to exploit, to abuse, and to neglect that population without accountability, and also has made it easier to sort of write them out of history. If you ask, when we were touring this exhibition and when I would show the films and talk about sort of the injustice that I came across on a firsthand basis with Afro-Mexicanos telling me about their experiences, oftentimes that was it was countered with a sort of a
Con una especie.
it was people didn't believe it. Like, is it really that
La
bad?
gente no lo
I mean, is
creería.
it really that bad? Basically, one of the reactions I would get. But
Que si deberá ser así
when you see a
tan,
photo of
tan,
someone,
tan mala la cosa. Si uno ve una foto, uno no.
you're confronted with the fact that their experience is valid, and it's depending on the size of the photo, it's on par with your experience. In other words,
Dependiendo de la talla de la foto, o sea, si es tamaño de grande, o sea, es prueba, no se puede cuestionar, es prueba de experiencia de algún modo. Y por eso fue que escogimos el medio visual. Y creo que
moved from just the oral history and the writing
es
into film.
eh,
Again, it helps to, people often trust what they see more than sort of what they hear in a lot of ways. I think that unfortunately was also part of the decision making process.
Thank you. Tenemos tiempo para dos preguntas. We have some time for two questions.
we have time for two questions. The first question is for Hugo. Where are you going to take this research of yours? Are there questions that you want to explore with your photos? Well, the idea behind my photographic work about where I want to take it. So one of the things that happens a lot with art in Mexico is that it gets stuck in museums. It all goes into the museums. And what we're doing with our African American project and the preservation of the family album is we're taking the photos to the communities and we're putting them on the walls in the community so that we can take the art out of the museum and so that it's art that's accessible to everyone. So that's where we're taking it. And another, I have a lot of sound in my headphones. I'm listening to another voice. ¿Está oyendo a la intérprete, señor Arellanes?
¿Qué está pasando? Bueno. Sí. Y bueno, y otro de las o- otra de las cosas que también estoy
Another thing that I'm doing,
colaborando mucho con los espacios académicos, como son
working a lot with
ahora
academic,
la Universidad de Berkeley, como es la UNAM, como es la Universidad de la Ciudad de México. Entonces, colaborando
the
siempre con
UNAM in
muchos
Mexico
espacios para que la
City,
información se difunda
so that the information is diffused,
empiece a fomentar mucho la
and so that the perspective, which is anti-racist, can be promoted. What I mentioned, which was mentioned by Monica Moreno in the morning, those are the places where I'm taking this.
Thank you very much. Gracias. Se está acabando el tiempo.
Muchas
Tiempo para
gracias.
una pregunta más. Y luego dedicar unos 5
I have
minutos.
time for one more question, and then we'll have 5 minutes for the introduction to the galleries. There's a question from Marco. How do you deal?
Who do not want to accept Mexico's African American history? Do you see this as a new trend in Mexican American studies?
To be honest, I mean, it's sort of it's sort of funny because I get there's less friction now than there used to be, in terms of accepting this. You know, people tend to downplay it and say it was only a small part of the population, but you know, you have to remind folks that the total amount of enslaved Africans who were kidnapped from the continent and brought to the Americas, you know, 95% of those enslaved Africans were taken to Latin America, and a large part of that number, you know, with only 5% going to North America, and a large part of that 95% were taken in and out of Veracruz, Mexico. So the numbers speak for themselves. I tend not to. I dismiss criticism because it's just it's a matter of re-educating someone, and that takes a lot of work, and that takes time, and all you can do is sort of keep on track with what you know to be true factually, and with what you know to be true, you know, ethically and morally and historically. So that's my answer. And you know, in terms of a new trend in Mexican American studies, yeah, hopefully it's a new trend in just American studies, because you know, the diaspora from Africa affects the independence and the projects of democracy from Canada to Argentina. So you know, it shouldn't. It's a shame that it has to be a new trend. It should just be on trend all the time.
Thank you very much. Ahora vamos a tener que cerrar esta discusión en poco tiempo, pero
Thank you very much. We're going to have to close this this conversation, but we would like Hugo to take us to galleries with a brief introduction to the 3 galleries. And then I also want to mention that those galleries are going to remain open. We can see them in the Latinx Research Center in our website here permanently, so the public can see them. So Hugo, please, if you could introduce the galleries. And thank you so much, Marco, for your participation, both of you. I'd like to continue this conversation for another hour, but we're running out of time. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Marcos.
Daniel, ¿tú abres la galería?
Daniel, can you open the gallery?
Sí, ¿con cuál empezamos?
Si quieres con la de huella negra para seguirla haciendo en el mismo orden.
Maybe huella negra, so we can do it in the same order we discussed them.
Bueno, pues como les contaba al principio,
Well, as I told you,
esta exposición
this exhibit
llamada Huella Negra
called Huella Negra
es un calendario
is a calendar
en el que buscamos a 12 personas que se reconocieran.
we looked for 12 people who recognize themselves as Afro-descendant doing having important contributions in different fields of knowledge, be it in politics, reporting, music, students. This first one here, Diego, he's the geophysics student in the UNAM, in engineering. Can you show us where we need to click to see more information? You get the details about each person who's there in the photos. Diego is Afro-Mexican from Mexico City. He's a grandchild of El Mulato Casillas, who did judo and Greco-Roman fights, martial arts. So anyway, every person who is in these photographs has a brief description of who he is, who he or she is. This is Hector, an academic in the UNAM in philosophy and letters, humanities, a member of lots of musical groups, and for a long time he coordinated searches against homophobia on the internet. He's had a lot to do with. He's contributed to the recuperation of history. He's a historian. So these are the profiles that we have focused on. We have tried where different disciplines are included, precisely to leave that stereotype behind, where the Afro-descendant person has got to be dedicated to any one thing. So these are the images. You can go in and look at each of those biographies. And I think there's a button where there's translation into English, all the texts that are in Spanish to begin with. So the next gallery, El polvito en tus zapatos. Here's the full text. In English and Spanish. There's an explanation of what we're going to see, how we can approach these objects, what were these objects for Costa Chica that for us are representative, and each one of these objects, each photo has its name on the image. We can see broadly what are the devil masks, this fish, the shotgun, which is part of hunting, rifle. These are communities that for a long time hunted. The recorder, which I explained to you. This object for me has signified a lot and has helped me, besides, to be able to move in my flexibility in terms of my situation. I could aspire to have other knowledge and not stay kind of stuck in the community. So, and now we move on to kind of a farewell. This exhibit where I took pictures that represent how we're living the situation with the environment, how we're passive. Here's the poem. If you weren't able to read it before, it's here in complete form. There are other images, many more, as I presented before, which have to do with this way in which I'm seeing it. This is a very large gallery. There are lots of other texts at the end of the room.
Sí, hay otros textos última sala de esta
Yes, in the last
Sí,
one of this
entonces,
exhibit.
eh, creo que es muy bonita esta exhibición
I
porque
think this is a
muchas
very
de las
beautiful
fotografias
exhibit
que
because
vemos
many of these
aquí
photos we
son
see
muy contemplativas,
are contemplative.
muy evocadoras.
They're
Algunas
evocative.
son imágenes
Many of them are
fuertes,
strong images,
pero otras son imágenes
but
también
some are
muy
also
bellas
beautiful
en las
images
en las que podemos pasar mucho tiempo frente
where
a
we can
ellas,
sort of spend a
mirándolas,
lot of time looking at
diciendo-
them
e imaginándonos
and
cómo
imagining
es
us,
esos
imagining
lugares,
how those
cómo,
places
cómo estamos viviendo
are, how we're living,
ese cambio en la forma en la que
this,
estamos
the
percibiendo
change
el mundo.
in which the
Entonces,
way in which our perception of the
aquí
world
también
is
en
changing.
este texto que está al final,
And in this text,
hay un poquito de este cuento
there's a little bit about this,
bueno, hay otro poema en el
another
que hago
poem
otra reflexión como
where I think, again, it's a reflection about life being lasting just a second, an instant.
gracias a todos los que
Thank you
los
to
que asistieron. Supongo que
all of you who have attended.
Daniel pondrá los enlaces para que
I
puedan
imagine
entrar
that
a las
Daniel
galerías
will
nuevamente
put
y
links
tomen su
in
tiempo
so
para
you
ver
can go into
cada
these
una de
galleries and
las imágenes.
take your time to
Agradecer
look at
mucho a
these
Daniel por
images.
todo.
And
Gracias,
thank
Ray,
you
por
to
Daniel.
Daniel for
No,
everything.
muchas gracias. Desafortunadamente tenemos que
Hugo,
cerrar.
thank you so
Se
much.
nos
We have to
acabó el
close
tiempo,
this. Our time
pero
is up.
aquí en el chat tenemos el enlace
In the
para
chat,
que ustedes
you will
puedan-
find
puedan
the
ir a
links.
las
So you
galerías
can go to those
en
galleries.
LRC, Latinx Research Center. Las galerías
LRC, and these galleries are
¿verdad, Hugo?
they're set up so that you can navigate within them, see the texts, and remain the time that you would like. These are beautiful images and you need to see them. If you have a big screen, that's better because they're lovely images. For now, we're going to have to close the session. Hugo, thank you so much for your presentation and for showing us your images, and Marco for your documentary. It's been very interesting. And unfortunately, we need to, these 2 hours went by so quickly. Thank you so much.
For our audience, thank you for participating. I apologize for not having more time to do a Q&A. The galleries are available through the LRC, the Latinx Research Center. You just go to the lrc.berkeley.edu and you will find these galleries. You can navigate them yourselves. So they're beautiful, beautiful galleries. And I would recommend that if you get a chance to see them on a big screen, the images are absolutely powerful and beautiful. So with this, many thanks to all. And Laura, any final word on your behalf?
Nada, nomás darles de nuevo gracias a Marco.
Just to say hello to Marco,
Diana Pachel, hoy en la mañana, la doctora
Diana
Mónica,
Pachel, Mónica Moreno Figueroa,
Nico
Nico Saldívar, Juliana Acevedo. It was a very important program. We were very proud to be able to support this work. It's so important.
I just thanked all the participants from this morning's symposium as well. And we're very proud to be able to support this incredibly important work that is really transforming the way that we understand identity and the way that and the struggle for inclusivity in Mexico and here in the United States and really elsewhere. And so it's a great privilege and an honor to have all of your work here today. Once again, thank you to the Latinx Research Center team, to Ray, to Diana for helping to create this program today. So we're very grateful to all of you who attended this morning and this afternoon. Thank you so much. And we're wishing you, Marco and Hugo, just increasing success in the very important and beautiful work that you're doing. Mucha suerte en todo el proyecto, los trabajos del futuro que están haciendo Marco y Hugo. Gracias. Sí, hasta luego.
Muchas gracias y buenas tardes y adiós. Gracias.
Adiós, adiós.
Dios, buenas tardes.